a serious discussion. Well, all these conversations are always serious, but this one in particular, if you are a UFC fan and you care about the current trajectory of their company. So what is very interesting about this particular lawsuit, it's a win and it's also a loss at the same time. And let me explain why. It is a loss for other mixed martial arts companies because of this, the UFC is going to continue to become a monopoly. And that means the competitive architecture for recruiting talent is going to still be in a dominant side of the UFC. And let me explain why. The UFC has the name, they have the promotion, but lo and behold, other organizations can pay you a whole lot more if, let's say, you are a former UFC fighter going into these organizations. So what that means is that the money may not have been enough. I got to be honest with you, because yes, $350 million is a lot of money, but for who and how many people? Because from what I've been told, everybody that is getting this money, right, is getting somewhere around $200,000 each. I'm talking about all the people that are involved in the lawsuit. And why is that important to bring up? Because $200,000 seems like a reasonable money to obtain from this class action lawsuit. Now, I gotta tell you, I don't know how to say this because I have been involved in class action lawsuits in workplaces before, and I don't want to mention which companies or anything like that, but there is a certain compensation that happens, right? You do get compensated, and you know, it may not be enough. I'll give you an example, right? Some of the latest money that I've received from a class action lawsuit that involves an entire company and a few of its employees, the most that I got, I'm going to say, look, let me just say this, right? I don't want to give out an exact number, but it was in the four figures for what that's worth, right? Okay, to some people that's enough money, to some people that's absolutely nothing. But to some people that may be the meaning of them being able to pay their bills, pay their mortgage, and something to that extent, depending on what your living situation is. Okay, for the UFC in particular, and $200,000 that each of these fighters are getting, it's reasonable, but I don't think it's what they were looking for. And at the same time, you also got to understand, right? Dana White said it best. He said that here in the UFC, we pay you for what you kill. And what exactly does he mean by that? Well, look, if you bring in pay-per-view numbers and you are a draw, well, you deserve a certain level of compensation. The problem is, who deserves the compensation and how do you measure that metric? For example, if you watch somebody on the prelims and let's say there's, I don't know, 100,000 people that are watching at that time, right? I'm not talking about the main card or anything like that. I'm just strictly talking about, let's say, the prelims, the first fight of the night. If they're getting 100,000 views, is it because people are interested in watching that person? Or is it because the whole entire product in and of itself is basically the attraction? In other words, those three letters, are they the attraction, or is it that individual that is the attraction? And quite frankly, I'm not the type of person to pretend that I know everything, but if I know something, I'm going to be very definitive about it. The truth is, I don't know. I don't know how to measure that metric or how you would find out whether people are actually watching the prelims because of that one particular person, or is it because they're watching the three letters that are involved, which is the UFC. And how about this? Just a little random occurrence right now as we are driving in the road. We got some turkeys on the road right here, right? So a different side of California that a lot of you people may not know about. It's a little countryside. So on any regard, I got to tell you guys, right? You don't know how to measure that. But one thing is rest assured that a lot of you will tune into a UFC fight based on the fact that the UFC guarantees action, they guarantee fights, and the reason why they're able to guarantee fights is for the simple fact that the UFC can obtain a roster full of people anywhere in the world at any time and can pay them for as low as 4 figures per fight. Obviously, that's not the case today. They get paid a little bit more than that, but nonetheless, they can lowball you based on the product that they have and the proven entity that they are. So again, how do you measure that? For example, I'll give you an example, right? Because this is close to home and very personal, so it's something that I could sort of touch in a tangible reality of things, right? I have a buddy out here in Sacramento, a guy who I've trained with, a guy who's a personal friend of mine, also a fellow Muslim brother. He's a BKFC fighter. His name is Idris Wasi. He's going to be fighting on the April 12th card against this guy named Jackson at the BKFC, right? So from what I understand, I think he's a prelim fighter at the current moment of time. I'm talking about my buddy and training partner, Idris, right? So if, let's say, again, throwing a random number out there, 100,000 people are watching his fight in the current moment that he's fighting, is it because you guys are interested in watching Wasi, or is it because the BKFC product is a known product that will deliver violence in which you people look for in a fighting weekend? And by the way, that's the same weekend as UFC 300, interestingly enough, right? So here's the thing. Even if that's my buddy and even he's a friend of mine, I don't know the answer to that. Is he a known person? Is he known as Conor McGregor? Of course not. Nobody is as known as Conor McGregor. However, he's known here in Sacramento, so how do you measure that, and how do we discuss his pay as a result of that? Maybe I got to go ask his manager to sort of ask how that plays out and how that's going to come a fold in terms of what it is that he's getting in relationship to what other fighters out there in the UFC are getting. So again, these are very important questions to ask, because once again, I think that the UFC decided to settle not because of moral standpoints or principles, but rather for self-preservation. And that's something we have to understand. Because a company, any corporation out there that is worth billions, will have a cutthroat mentality when it comes to how they do business. Unless, of course, if you are the Saudis, unless, of course, if you are the Emiratis who are just paying people out the yin-yang with basically reckless abandonment because they can literally afford it, considering they are in a net worth of the trillions, never mind the billions. Ruben asks, who are you? Who am I? I'm somebody you're watching right now on YouTube, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for your attention. That I can discuss on different days, but for now, we're going to talk about important topics at hand. But thank you for your input there, Ruben. So, I'm nobody special other than just a YouTuber who's trained with some of the best fighters in the world out here in Sacramento and elsewhere. And if you like and subscribe to my channel, later on, I can tell you more about that, but for now, I want to stick to the topic at hand, and thank you for your comments, and thank you for not being rude like some of the other people yesterday on the live stream right around this time. Awesome, brother. Thank you, Ruben. Yeah, so this guy yesterday, I don't want to get off topic, but I'm going to get back on the UFC topic, but I'll say this. Yesterday, this guy came on and he said, yeah, you shouldn't be doing a live stream while you're driving. You're going to cause accidents. Well, fool, I told him, do you realize how much of a coordinated person I am? Okay, do you realize that I'm okay with, hello, my friend, Freeview Media. How are you, Freeview Media? That's what's up. Thank you for tapping in. So, And then he said, yeah, I'm just watching because I want to see you crash on live stream because you shouldn't be doing that. What a hater. Now, don't be like that guy, right? Because the reality is a lot of people love to see other people fail, and that's just really what it comes down to. But anyways, going back to the class action lawsuit, how do we determine what is the worth of a prelim fighter, right? Because there's one thing for sure. Does not look good for the UFC to settle, I think. Of course not, because that's just what I was getting to, was they settled based on self-preservation and defensive mechanism rather than, let's say, moral principles. Because a company, and that's what I was getting to before I was getting off the tangent, a company is not going to operate on moral principles unless, of course, that is the main ethos of your particular company. What it is you're in a situation where your back is against the wall, and I'm talking about the UFC, and as a result, they had to act immediately in order for them to preserve themselves. Because let's be honest, right? I don't know the amount that these fighters were suing the UFC. We have a couple of people in mind. We got Mark Hunt. He was suing based on the fact that he had to fight Brock Lesnar on steroids and on a short notice. Kung Lee, a longtime Strikeforce turned UFC fighter when the UFC bought Strikeforce. Who else? Cajun Johnson. I don't know exactly why he's part of that class action lawsuit, but I think it is stemmed from when the UFC fighters went to, I would believe it was some sort of a UFC getaway meeting of some sort where a few of these fighters got together. And by the way, Kobe Bryant was part of that whole ordeal. He went in there and basically talked to the fighters to talk to them about investing their money, right? Investing money that perhaps maybe they may not have. And again, I got to tell you, going back to Ruben's question when he asked who I am, I'll tell you who I am. I'm a YouTuber who does MMA content, but will tell you with objective truth. You see, a lot of YouTubers out there, they love to talk to you with emotional fallacies, but also because of the fact that they want to gain an audience. I'm not here to do that. What I am here to do is give you an objective truth without any feelings or any particular biases involved. And by the way, if I have a friend who's a fighter or a friend that I've trained with who you guys see fight on TV, I'm going to disclose that because I'm going to tell you that, you know what? This guy right here is a friend of mine, so don't take my particular pick on this particular prediction and preview as gold because obviously I'm going to have biasness. Well, guess what? I'm going to operate in the same manner when it comes to talking about the UFC and its class action lawsuit. Because here's the one conflict and a cognitive dissonance that I have going on with the UFC. I'm going to tell you. Although I believe that Dana White and his notion where he says something to the extent of, you know what? You are out here for an opportunity, not a career. I believe that. We pay people what they kill. In other words, if you bring in the pay-per-view numbers, then you deserve what you get. But here's the problem that I have with that. Let's go Alex Poetan. I think in this case, fighters think twice on signing the contract. In terms of signing with the UFC, yes. But here's something you got to understand too, which is very interesting, Freeview Media, is that the reason why, let's say, Yoel Romero, Phil Davis, all these other UFC transports, right, that go into Bellator, 1FC, and things of that nature, the reason why they're able to obtain a certain amount of pay that they are getting is simply because of the fact that they fought in the UFC because of the big name product that the UFC offers. So in other words, if you fought in the UFC, I think it is incumbent upon you to use that particular clout, to use that particular marketing machine that they have behind them, and simply use it to get you a better deal elsewhere. So you guys know Matt Mitrione, right? Matt Mitrione was the Ultimate Fighter contestant in the same season with Kimbo and Brendan Schaub, which was season 9. It was Rashad Evans versus Rampage Jackson, all heavyweights. Obviously, former football player Nick Diaz Army in this month. All right, that's what's up. So I'm assuming you are from Northern California as well. Obviously, I live in Northern California out here in Sacramento. So shout outs to all the Northern California heads, all the Southern California heads, all the Sureños, all the Norteños, all the Crips, the Bloods, the Asians, and all that. But anyways, so going back to Matt Mitrione. He signed a deal with the UFC. He had a great career with the UFC. And then he signed with Bellator, right? So after he signed to Bellator, he saw Dana White at a club. And he gave Dana White the middle finger. And Dana White's dumbfounded. Why is Matt Mitrione giving me the middle finger in the middle of the club? So Dana White said, hey, come here, Matt Mitrione. And to Matt Mitrione's surprise, Dana White was very friendly. He's not an op, he's not an enemy or anything like that, but why did Matt Mitrione perceive it that way? Probably because they wanted to lock him down on a low ball deal, and instead he got a better deal with Bellator as a result of it. So Dana White congratulated him, which is surprising. If you are being worked against your interests, in this case losing Matt Mitrione as a talent, why on earth would you congratulate him? Well, I'm going to tell you why. For the simple fact that for Dana White, it is simply one thing and one thing only. It is just all about business. Business first always. That's right. Yes, business first always. That's really what it comes down to. So there is no hatred or anything like that. There is no animosity because it's just business by the end of the day. And guess what? If you can lowball someone a particular price, then by all means do that. I'll give you a little story, okay? Well, I just a short one. So I had my fence done, right? I had these contractors come and do my fence or anything or something to that extent, right? Obviously, we had a little bit of some, negotiation issues. He was missing certain parts that I wanted as a foundation on the fence. That's why we all are getting weird matchups in the UFC also. Okay, I'm going to address that, the weird matchups that are happening in the UFC and why UFC 300 looks like the way that it does. But anyways, at first I was thinking to myself, man, you know what? This guy's trying to lowball me. I got emotional, and then I realized, you know what? I'm just going to play this game in a business first setting, which is what? I'm just basically going to ask for the best deal that I could and really not get mad at this guy because he's just trying to do what he does. And I don't know, the other nefarious reasons behind the fact that he couldn't find certain parts that, I wanted to be on the fence and this and that. So we just negotiated. All right, well, if you can't find these parts, then charge me less. And lo and behold, I mean, look, it didn't come out the way that I wanted, but at the same time, also, I sort of got the better end of the deal because I got a new fence for less money. Now, was it the most ideal look that I wanted? Maybe not, but you get what you get, and this is sort of the same situation that you have going on with the UFC, right? This particular class action lawsuit was not the ultimate outcome that the UFC was looking for. And as a result, they had to settle for this. Because if the UFC was going to go through with the lawsuit, unfortunately, they were going to face dire consequences that could have been to their company. And that's something you really got to understand. So now, is this good for the UFC? Or is this better for the fighters? Here's my answer to this, okay? I think, just in my humble opinion, they got more than what they had asked for. Okay, they got way more than what they had asked for. And why is that? Because I tell you what, a lot of these fighters that receive money, they don't get that kind of money when they were active in their fight career anyway. That's the problem, you think? What do you mean exactly by that? Like, explain in context what you mean by that, by the problem. The problem as in they got too much, or the problem as in the settle did not look good for the UFC? Yeah, okay. So, again, they had to do it under the pretenses of survival mechanisms. Because, from what I understand, okay, with just forgetting the facts and figures that I looked at a couple of months ago, because I don't remember the exact number that they were looking for, but it would have been very disastrous for the UFC. Very disastrous. We're talking about in the billions that they were planning on suing the UFC. Okay, but 300 million was an investment in the long term. I think that's the best way to put it. But at the same time, I think a lot of these fighters got way overpaid. So I want to get to the next topic of fighter pay, because this is really important. I think a lot of fighters can sometimes be real big crybabies about this, but at the same time, there's a lot of fighters out there that really deserve a whole lot more than what they are getting. And guess what? Who is that? It's Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is literally the most underpaid fighter when it comes to the names in comparison to Anthony Joshua, when it comes to the comparison of the names like Deontay Wilder, when it comes to the names of, let's say, even Floyd Mayweather. Because when you say that Conor McGregor is up there in those top echelon names of combat sports, and we're not talking about statistics or current rankings or anything like that, we're just talking about notoriety. Because of the UFC's contract structure, it literally makes him the most underpaid superstar fighter there is. So in other words, how Conor McGregor is the most paid fighter in the history of the UFC is also the same reason why he is the most underpaid fighter in the UFC. Let me repeat that. Because Conor McGregor is the most paid fighter in the UFC, it is also the same reason why he is the most underpaid fighter of all time. And I need you to wrap your head around that. Because the more that you wrap your head around that, the more that you can understand the generalization of this particular lawsuit. And going back to these prelim fighters, in all true to God honesty, they do make the company. Because in order for you to have a product that is worth about 7 hours long, with the type of fights that they put on, you need a big roster. But also, I think they saturated the roster based on the fact that they needed all these events. And by the way, speaking of weird matchups, I wanted to get to that particular question with the weird matchups, right? It's not so much of the weird matchups, but the fact that we missed Conor McGregor in UFC 300. That's really what it is. So the matchups that you see in the UFC right now, Jamal Hill taking on Alex Pereira. Now, that is a fight that needs to happen. But you got to ask yourself, is that a fight that needs to happen in UFC 300, especially with the magnitude and how they're hyping up this event as this 100, 200, 300 type of Super Bowl event? And my answer is no, because obviously they're looking for Marvel comic versus DC type of matchups, Godzilla versus King Kong type of matchups. And that's not what they're getting with this. Because of the fact that Conor McGregor's contract issues sort of correlates with all of these things that are happening in the class action lawsuit. Why? Conor wants to go and box for Saudi Arabia and fight Manny Pacquiao, which, by the way, would probably make him a whole lot more money, even with the fight that he had against Floyd Mayweather. That's something you got to take into consideration. He could literally make more money than he ever did in his whole entire UFC career with one fight. Because he's in a position to where he can literally ask the Saudis $300 million. That is a number that is realistic in Conor McGregor's case when it comes to dealing with the Saudis, and I need you to understand that. The UFC does not want that because it will embarrass them, just like this particular incident with the settlement would embarrass them. Now, does it make them look bad? Yes, but only temporarily, which is why this temporary settlement that they decided to pay is going to be great for their long-term investment. And that's really what we have going on with this particular instance. So let me know what you guys think. Like and subscribe. I'll continue on for maybe another 4 or 5 minutes just to make it on the 3-minute mark. But understand that, yes, this may seem like a loss for the UFC, but in the long term, even better for them. Because guess what? The result of this whole entire matter has now just emboldened the monopolization of the UFC. So understand that. Understand that it can do that. Because a part of this lawsuit that they had going on was to basically put the UFC in line for their monopolization. And they didn't. It's going to be business as usual. Is $300 million a lot of money to lose? Yes. But guess what? UFC 300, they're going to make a lot more money. After that, there's the Conor McGregor fight. After that, there's Brazil. There's also Ilia Topuria on the rise. And not only on the rise, but also in a trajectory to become one of Spain's biggest superstars. I feel the settlement is based on the money, and also that the documents would be released, all info about the UFC, and devastating if the lawsuit continues. I couldn't have said that better myself, Freeview Media. That's really what it comes down to, isn't it? It comes down to the reality of that particular notion that you just mentioned. It's kind of like this, right? Have you guys ever gotten a ticket? Speeding or anything like that. You can fight these cases when, let's say, you get caught for speeding. Really, you can fight these cases. That's the way they settled. So you can choose to go to trial, or you can choose to pay a fine and maybe even do traffic school to sort of cut points down from your insurance. You can do that because that's a viable option. But here's the thing. If you go to trial and you fail, and not only do you fail, you get convicted. I don't think convicted is the right word, but they find out that you really were speeding, you end up paying more. And it opens a whole different can of worms. So that's really what Freeview Media is saying here. Hell yeah, but always lose in a case or pay. Yeah, heck yeah, but always lose in case or pay. Yep, that's really what it comes down to. So those are the choices that you have. So what I think is that this is the best move for the UFC because they didn't want to open up different cans of worms. Monopolization is one of them. The aspect of bringing the Ali Act into MMA is another situation. Now, MMA is literally still an outlaw environment, a free-for-all. In other words, they can do what they want with their contracts. They can also do what they want in terms of lowballing the fighters. And with that, they can also carry the strong narrative that they are the best league and the best fight promotion in the world. And they are. Because quite frankly, I gotta tell you, MMA is UFC and UFC is MMA. For all of those casual, low IQ people that ask you if you train MMA, a lot of them don't ask you if you train mixed martial arts. They don't ask you if you train boxing. They don't ask you if you train jiu-jitsu. They don't ask you if you train Muay Thai. None of these other compository sports that are involved in MMA. They ask you, do you train UFC? Which, by the way, as inaccurate as that sounds, that's really how they ask you when they don't know anything about this sport in and of itself. And by the way, I've mentioned this over and over again in this particular channel and content. I urge you to take a look at all my catalogs in this particular channel, because I've said this numerous times. The casuals are the ones who bring money into this sport. So in other words, their low-hanging fruit mentality and their, how do I say this? Their low frequency way of thinking is always going to bring them into this conversation of, well, you train UFC and they don't know anything about MMA or Muay Thai or anything like that. And that's really what it comes down to when it comes to that particular aspect. So that is all that I have for you guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you guys soon. I'll be dropping more content. I'll be bringing in more videos. And don't forget to tell a friend, share, so I could bring you guys the most epic mixed martial arts content mankind has ever seen.